Hey, what's going on, guys? Today I'm going to show you how to properly draw this position on the board if you're playing with the black pieces. So let's just get started. So obviously black cannot win. They only have a bishop and a king, but white has two pawns and a bishop. But the bishops are of opposite colors. So notice that white has a dark square bishop and black has a light square bishop. But they do have two extra pawns and the pawns are connected. So if these pawns ever get obviously to the last rank, they can be promoted. You can get a queen and you can win the game. But because there's opposite color bishops, there's always that slight possibility that the game could finish in a draw, because this bishop will be able to sacrifice itself for these two pawns, and then there will be not enough material to checkmate. Now, in order to accomplish that, black only has one plan, one idea to do this, and many possibilities to go wrong. For example, I'm going to show you first how it can go wrong and how to actually win with the white pieces if black makes a mistake, and then I'm going to show you the very simple, easy way to draw this position. So the first way that black can go wrong here is to go, for example, bishop to b3. And before I show you the line, let me explain the reason behind this. The way to white's plan in this position, the way to win is to put this pawn on e6 and then go for king to e5 and then push the other pawn to f6 now that is supported by the king. And once that position is reached, then it's a very easy win by white. So black needs to prevent that from happening. So one idea is to go bishop to b3, controlling the e6 square. Now, if we go bishop to b3, this loses because now we have a very interesting combination here with the white pieces. You can give this check here, for example, with bishop to g5. And we want to see where this king goes. The king can go here to d7 or it can go to f7. Whichever side this king goes, we're going to go with our king to the opposite side. For example, if king to f7, then the way to win this, remember, we want to push this pawn to e6, but if we do it right now, then the bishop can sacrifice itself for the pawn on e6, and if the pawn takes, king takes, and this will be insufficient material to checkmate the black king. So you cannot push the pawn right away. So in order to get this pawn push to e6, we have to bring our king to this square here on d6 in order to support the pawn. So we're going to go the opposite side to wherever this king goes. So we're going to go king to d4, and notice something here. If this bishop comes to c2 to attack the pawn on f5, then there's nothing protecting the e6 square anymore, and we can get the push right away, followed by king to e5. So that cannot happen. So this bishop has to stay in this diagonal. So bishop to a2 could happen, and then we continue. We go king to c5, the bishop stays in the same diagonal, bishop to b3, we get our king to d6, and it doesn't matter what happens now, we're going to be able to get king to e6, king goes to e8, we get to f6, and there's nothing that black can do for to prevent pawn to f7, followed by bishop to h6 check, and then we get a queen on the next move, winning the game. So that would be the first way that black can go wrong in this position. Now, instead of bishop to b3 like we played here, what if the bishop gives a check here on c2? Thinking, okay, if you move the king, I'm just going to take your pawn on f5. Well, of course, we're not going to do that. We're just going to play here king to f4, and here we're going to win in another way. Remember, the bishop is no longer protecting the square on e6, so it has to return to b3 now to protect that square. If the bishop stays in this diagonal here, then we go e6 followed by king e5 and f6 like we mentioned before we went into all these variations. So the bishop, after this check to c2 and king to f4, has to return to b3, and now since this diagonal is taken and we cannot give this check, we're going to go ahead and just bring our king to g5. Our ideal situation is to put our king on g6 and then be able to get this check here and then go king to f6. That way we can support our pawn to e6. So that's going to be our main plan here. So the bishop, as we mentioned, has to stay in this diagonal. So we go bishop c4 and then king g6. The bishop stays in the diagonal, and we continue now with bishop check. Now this king has to move, and once it does, then we can go ahead, play king to f6 and e6, and we're going to have the same position. We're going to be able to keep advancing our pawns and win the game. For example, here, king to f6, the king goes to e8. We just follow that up with king to e6. The bishop returns, tries to attack this pawn. We just go king to e5, and we're going to have the same position where now we go f6 and try to get f7. There's a few things that black can do here in order to try to get the draw, but they all fail. For example, they can go for bishop to d1, pawn to f6, and bishop to h5. The problem with this is that yes, you're preventing me from going f7, but I could simply just go king to f4, and after you go bishop there, I can just come here, and this bishop doesn't have any squares. I'm going to be able to get my pawn to f6, f7, f8, get a queen, and win the game. So obviously, this doesn't work. So let's just see now what is the plan in order to save this position. The idea is that, remember, we want to control this square, but instead of going bishop to b3 or bishop to c2, the way to do this is by bishop to d7. Now, this pawn cannot move, and if you ever push f6, I'm going to go king to f7, and I'm just going to pretty much move this bishop back and forth in this diagonal, because you're never going to be able to get your pawn to e6. And now, this king cannot move from the protection of this pawn because we just take it. So the king has to always stay in this squares around the pawn. Otherwise, we take the pawn. And if we give a check anywhere here on b4 or g5, again, we go king to f7. And you cannot push this pawn because then we just sacrifice the bishop. So let's just take a quick look at a way that white can try to get his king to g6. But notice that it won't work. Once this king goes here to f4, we just play king to f7, and we don't touch our king anymore. We leave it there. If this king goes here, we're going to move our bishop back and forth. We go bishop back to c8. And notice, this pawn cannot move. And if you ever get f4 in, for example, then we just go bishop e6. The king moves. We go bishop back, king here, bishop back. We just put this bishop in this diagonal, and white can no longer make any progress. So this will be the way to draw this position. Hope you guys enjoyed the video. As always, stay safe, have a great day, show respect to your opponent. See you on the next one.